5 young men vanished after a basketball game on a winter night in 1978. 4 of their bodies would later be found scattered across a snowy mountain wilderness, miles from where they should have been. One was never found at all. The most disturbing part? These weren't adventurers or risk-takers. These were 5 men with intellectual disabilities who should have taken a simple drive home. Instead, they drove 70 miles in the wrong direction, abandoned their perfectly functioning car, and fled into a frozen forest to die. Welcome to Enigma Files. This is the case of the Yuba County Five. February 24th, 1978. Chico, California. A green 1969 Mercury Montego, carrying 5 young men, left Chico State University after a basketball game. Their plan was simple: drive 50 miles south back to Yuba City, where they all lived in a group home for men with developmental disabilities. The 25-mile drive should have taken about an hour. They never arrived. The 5 men were Gary Mathias, 25, a former Army serviceman diagnosed with schizophrenia; Jack Madruga, 30, who owned and drove the car that night; Jackie Huett, 24, Theodore Weiher, 32, William Sterling, 29. The next morning, when the men failed to return to their supervised residence, a search began. Jack Madruga's car was eventually discovered on February 28th, abandoned on a mountain road in the opposite direction from their intended route. The vehicle was parked neatly, undamaged, with gas in the tank. Inside were maps, Jackie's wallet, and several wrappers from fast food eaten earlier that evening. But instead of heading south toward home, they had traveled 70 miles northeast into the Sierra Nevada mountains. They had driven up a winding road deep into Plumas National Forest, nearly 5,000 feet in elevation, into an area blanketed with snow. The car was found on a dirt road that was normally closed during winter months due to heavy snowfall. But the winter of 1978 had been unusually light on snow, so the road was accessible. Still, the temperature that night had dropped to 19 degrees Fahrenheit. What could compel 5 men to abandon a working vehicle and venture into a freezing forest in the dark? But the discovery of the car was just the beginning. As investigators pieced together the men's movements that night, something didn't add up. There were no signs of violence or struggle with the car. No evidence of drugs or alcohol. The keys were gone, but otherwise, the scene suggested 5 men had simply stepped out of their vehicle and walked away into a frozen wilderness at night without proper clothing for the conditions. To understand why this case continues to haunt investigators, we need to understand who these men were. All 5 had developmental disabilities, though to varying degrees. They weren't incapable of caring for themselves. In fact, they had significant independence. They held jobs, played on a basketball team together, and were described by their families as functional and relatively self-sufficient despite their challenges. Gary Mathias' case was more complex. Beyond his intellectual disability, he had been diagnosed with schizophrenia after his military service. He had been hospitalized previously during psychotic episodes and took medication to control his condition. However, according to his family, he had been stable for some time. Jack Madruga, the owner and driver of the Mercury, had a driver's license and regularly drove the others to basketball games. The men were all familiar with the route between Chico and Yuba City, having made the trip many times before. These weren't reckless teenagers or thrill seekers. These were grown men with established routines who relied on structure and familiarity. For them to dramatically deviate from their well-known route home, something extraordinary must have happened. They weren't the type to go off exploring. Gary's stepfather, Elmer Warnock, told the Sacramento Bee in a 1978 interview, they would have been afraid of the dark, afraid of the woods. They wouldn't go into the woods without a very compelling reason. Theodore Weiher's father put more bluntly, he didn't like camping. He didn't like the woods. He hated the cold. There's no way he would have walked into those mountains willingly. How could 5 men who fear the wilderness end up straying so far from their familiar path? And what could possibly have convinced them to leave the safety of their car on a freezing night? As investigators would discover, The men hadn't just wandered a short distance from their vehicle. They had traveled miles into one of the most desolate regions of the Sierras. When search teams failed to locate the men near the car, they expanded their search. Helicopters scanned the rugged terrain, while ground teams battled snowdrifts and freezing temperatures. But the weather deteriorated, and deep snow hampered search efforts. Days stretched into weeks with no sign of the missing men. Then came the first twist. A witness came forward claiming to have seen the Mercury that night. Joseph Shones had been on the same mountain road when his own car became stuck in snow. As he was trying to free it, he suffered chest pains and laid down in his back seat to rest. He reported seeing lights from another vehicle, possibly the Mercury, and several men walking near his car. When he called out, the lights went out and the men vanished. Shones assumed they were part of a marijuana-growing operation and were avoiding detection. Was it the Yuba County Five Shones encountered? If so, why would they flee from someone who might have helped them? The second twist came when searchers realized a man had passed a ranger station cabin just 1.5 miles beyond where their car was abandoned. The cabin was fully stocked with food, beds, and a propane heating system. If they had been lost or in trouble, why wouldn't they have sought shelter there? But the most significant breakthrough came in June, almost 4 months after their disappearance, when a group of motorcyclists discovered Theodore Weiher's body in a different Forest Service trailer approximately 19 miles from the abandoned Mercury. The scene inside the trailer would confound investigators for decades to come. The trailer where Weiher's body was found presented a puzzle that seemed to defy explanation. As search teams converged on this new location, they discovered evidence that would make this case one of the most perplexing in criminal history. But before they could even process the scene, 3 more bodies would be found, each discovery raising more questions than answers. In a Forest Service trailer, Theodore Weiher's body was found, surrounded by supplies that could have kept the men alive for weeks. Yet he died of starvation and exposure. His body was neatly placed on a mattress, his shoes removed and placed beside him, losing nearly 100 pounds before passing away. Strange evidence was found inside: open cans of food, used matches, a lantern, and the wrapper's missing shoes. Outside, the bodies of Madruga and Sterling were found nearby, while Jackie Huett's remains were discovered scattered by animals a mile away. What baffled investigators most was the distance. The trail was 19 miles from their car, through rough terrain and freezing conditions. How did these men, some with physical limitations, make the journey? Even more disturbing, Gary Mathias remains missing, and Weiher's feet showed no frostbite, hinting he might have been carried. Theories have emerged over the years, but none fully explain the case. One theory suggests a psychotic episode triggered by Gary's schizophrenia, but it doesn't account for the men's organized behavior at the trailer. Another points to external threats, possibly involving illegal activity. But if they were fleeing, why go deeper into the wilderness? A third theory suggests disorientation due to a medical episode, but this doesn't explain their actions. Could Gary have survived longer and attempted to find help? His body was never found, and Weiher's shoes were missing, possibly taken by Gary. Retired Detective Jack Palchak summed it up: they were running from something terrifying. 47 years later, the Yuba County Five remains a haunting mystery. With crucial evidence lost and questions unanswered, the case leaves us with chilling question. What could drive 5 men from safety into certain death? And is Gary Mathias still out there, holding the final piece of this puzzle? Thank you for watching. If you liked the video, please press the like button. Subscribe to the channel for more Enigma files. And comment down below, what do you think about this case? Until next time, some mysteries remain unsolved.